Hey guys, Naz here. Today I'm going to be taking you through how to pattern a quadruped body, but one that's sort of asymmetrical. So think something like this crouching Ryko that I did, or a running horse, anything where the legs aren't matching up exactly the same on both sides. When I first patterned this on Ryko, it really hurt my brain. It was really difficult to sort of wrap my head around how to pattern this sort of thing. And on that note, this is an advanced patterning technique. So if you haven't made a lot of quadruped patterns before by yourself, I would recommend going back and watching my quadruped body patterning tutorial, and that takes you through all the steps on making just a generic quadruped pattern where all the legs are symmetrical, and it shows you how that pattern gets sewn together, and it'll make a lot more sense. I'm going to be skimming over how you sew this together because I've already covered it in that video, and this video is really for the more advanced pattern makers. But still watch it. If you don't feel you're up to this stage yet, you might sort of get something out of it and be able to apply that to other patterns that you are making. So here's the reference we're going to be using today. This was my horse Cooper, so I had him many years ago. He's about 1 year old in this picture, so just a baby I think, but I thought this would make a really good reference for a sort of running pattern. You'd need to obviously use wire if you're making a horse like this with such skinny legs. His legs wouldn't hold themselves in that position, or standing up for that matter. So anyway, I'm just cleaning up this picture here so it's a little bit less distracting for us to eventually make our pattern off of. Now there are a couple of terms that I'm going to be using. I think they're horsey terms, but they might be used with other animals, but that's just something that I'm going to be referring to a lot in this video, and that term is near legs and far legs. So I'm going to be referring to the two legs that are closest to us, closest to the camera, as the near legs, and the two legs that are furthest away from us on the opposite side as the far legs. And I'm just going to be using that to differentiate between the two, but you can call them whatever you want. That's just the terms that I found easiest. So when you're patterning something like this, you're going to have to find a straight side shot of the pose that you want to be patterning. When I made Ryko, I could only find images, drawn images of Ryko in that sort of pose that he's often seen, in that crouching sort of stalking tiger pose. I could only find 3/4 views of him, and that's part of what made making his pattern so difficult, because I didn't have a side view to just trace off of, which is how I make most of the patterns. I had to actually draw from the side him in that crouching pose and go off that, and I'm not really that fantastic at drawing poses and things of animals, so that's not really my forte. I much prefer to work off a side reference. So you might not have any difficulty in that. You might be excellent at drawing and you'd be able to draw this dynamic pose from the side, but either way you're going to either need a reference that you found or a reference that you've drawn that is that character from the side. So I've just gone ahead and I've just applied like a white overlay over this whole image so it's a little bit easier to see where we're drawing. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to mark out the general shape of our body, our near legs and our far legs, and we're going to do this all in different colours. So what I like to do is I like to draw the areas of the body that are going to stay the same, the areas that are going to be the same on both sides. So that's usually your back, your neck, your belly, things like that, and then the patterns are going to change from one side to another depending on the angle of the shoulder, the angle of the rump and the hip, that sort of thing. But you can see here I'm just going ahead and drawing what the side pattern would be in blue, the parts that will not be changing between the near side and the far side pattern, because we're going to be patterning separate patterns for each side, for both the outside and the inner legs. Simplifying his shapes a little bit here. When you're making realistic patterns, you might not want to follow every sort of bump and curve and divot that happens in their sort of natural anatomy. It can get a little bit too complicated there, so you might see me cutting off certain areas or smoothing out certain areas. Now I've picked a different colour pen and I'm going in and I'm drawing the near legs. So I'm just doing a basic outline, not really anything special. If I was making this pattern as a finished polished pattern, I would go ahead and I would make sure that I might thicken the legs a little bit to account for the stuffing going inside the legs. I would make sure that all the hooves were the same size. I would just make sure it was a bit neater, but I'm just showing you the general idea here. And now I'm going ahead and I'm drawing the far legs in a different colour, in this pink, and I'm trying to imagine what they look like through, you know, if you had x-ray vision, what would those legs look like from the other side. If you have reference that shows both sides, that is very lucky, but I don't really know if you will unless you're drawing the pose yourself, but that might be something you want to do. But here you can see I'm sort of just doing x-ray vision, showing where I think those legs would join up to the belly and the rump and things like that, which is the blue section, which is that section that's not going to change. So now I'm going to actually work on doing the pattern. So you're going to be patterning one side at a time. So you're going to be patterning the side of his body, his neck, his rump, and then I'm going to be including the near side legs in that pattern. So it's just the same if you were doing a quadruped pattern, just a standard standing quadruped pattern. We're just going to be tracing the body, the legs all in one piece. I'm also going to be putting that little line that I like to do in the inner hip. You can see how I sew that and what that does in my quadruped patterning tutorial, or if you want you can just go ahead and look at some of my old pony patterns. That might make a little more sense to you. That just adds that little 3D hip area in the pattern, which is a little bit more complicated to sew if you haven't done it before. But as I said, that previous tutorial does cover how to sew that and really explains visually how that comes together. So I'm just going over all those lines that we've already done. Sometimes I find it easier to go over drawn lines rather than trying to a couple of times go over the realistic image or the drawn image reference. I just like to have those thick bulky lines to trace over. It sort of takes the thinking out of it, if that makes sense. I'm just going to go ahead and trace those orange lines on this front leg here. I'll be removing the gap or removing that line that is going between the belly and the top of that leg at the shoulder. So it's all going to become one piece, and same at the back. I'm just going to be tracing around all that orange piece as well. So to pattern the inner pieces of our inner legs for this near side pattern, I'm just going to be going ahead and adding that half moon shape that you guys might have seen me pattern before. Again, the purpose of this is explained in that quadruped patterning tutorial. I've also done that little half moon shape going into the sort of armpit of the front leg, and I'm just labeling these, and I'll erase that main body piece, and that will give me our inner leg pieces for this near side of our pattern. So next we're going to be patterning the far side of our pattern, and we're just going to be repeating exactly the same process, making sure that your blue lines are still the same, so your body is staying the same, but it's just the position of those legs that are changing. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to trace over that far side pattern. This will be flipped when you go to print it out, because you're not going to have sort of two pattern pieces going towards the right. You're going to have one going to the left and one going to the right, so when they come together they will make this horse shape. So now I'm just getting rid of the legs that I've drawn before and keeping that piece that I drew over the blue lines, and I'm just going to be tracing over the pink instead of the orange, and repeating the process for the inner legs. Exactly the same, except the legs are just in a different position, but our body is staying central. If you're like me and have trouble visualising what the legs might look like on the other side, definitely go and look up some photo reference, even if it isn't of the exact sort of animal or character that you're making. For example, when I was working on Ryko, I looked up images of crouching tigers and cats and things like that, and that gave me a better sense of how the pose worked in 3D space. I also ended up sculpting Ryko's pose. I forgot about that. I sculpted his pose out of clay, and while I didn't extract the pattern from it, I ended up getting a much better understanding of how that pattern worked and how those legs balance the character when they're in a crouching pose, like a crouching tiger pose. So it can help to just make a quick sculpt as like a study, and this will give you a better idea and an understanding of how that pose works in 3D space if you need that. So now we've got both our sides patterned, including the inner leg pieces for both our opposing sides. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start marking in where our gusset is going to go. And if you watched any of my previous videos, I've explained how to pattern a gusset a gazillion times, but essentially I'm going to mark all the areas along, because the gusset's going to run down the neck, under the belly and up the rump. You can see I've put a little mark like an arrow mark for where I want that gusset to finish at the end of the rump. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to do markings all along where our blue lines were, and they're just going to be sort of like our key landmark markings. You can put in as many or as little as you like, but I try to just put them in the key points in that pattern. So start of the neck, where it sort of buffs out at his chest, along the curvature of his chest, start of the front leg, back of the front leg, probably one in the middle of his belly, where his sort of elbow or sort of his inner thigh is going to be, and then your final mark will be the one that's at the end of where that section is going to stop at the top of the rump, so that area 9 there that I've marked. So we're going to be, when we sew this pattern, sewing along all the top where I just put this little dotted line, so we don't need to worry about that, and where the head joins the neck is going to be open. In this pattern in particular, I won't be patterning the head. So I've just gone ahead and I've drawn a horizontal line, roughly as long as I think the gusset is going to be, and I'm just going to use Photoshop to rotate this line along where that gusset is going to join that side piece, so along the neck, under the chest, under the belly and up the rump. So I'm just going to rotate it up and along there, and I'm going to mark all those key landmarks onto this gusset. Now, what is more complicated about this pattern than making a standard gusset is we're just going to have to do this twice. So we're going to do this on one side, so we're going to pattern the near side of the gusset, and then we're going to flip everything over and we're going to pattern the other side of the gusset separately, because unlike a symmetrical pattern, when the legs are splayed differently like this, you're going to have sections of the gusset that are going to not be symmetrical either. So you're going to have sort of that little divot that you typically see in quadruped gussets. That's going to be, one's going to be more forward and one's going to be more back, so you're going to have differences in the gusset in that respect. It's not too hard once you wrap your head around it, it's just a little bit more time consuming to have that gusset that is two-sided rather than one-sided, so we're not just patterning one side and flipping it over. So you can put all those markings in there. You can add the numbers if you want as you go along to help yourself. I personally don't really worry too much because I have a general idea of where those points are going to be. Doing this by hand on a piece of paper, you can just get something like a flexible measuring tape and do the same, just transfer those lengths, those measurements onto a straight line. I'm just making sure that this line is nice and straight again, so I can draw out one half of the gusset. So I'm just going to eyeball how wide I want the gusset at each of those points, and that's just something that you're going to learn the more you practice. You usually want your gusset thinner than you think it will be. Usually they balloon out a lot because you're going to have the stretch running horizontal a lot. If this gusset was going up and down, the stretch would be going from side to side, which is how you want it. So usually you want the start of the neck to be a bit thinner. On a horse, I have a general idea, you maybe want where their chest is to be a little bit thicker, their belly's a little bit thicker, and then going up the rump it's going to thin right out. So I'm just using that information to draw my gusset here. You can see I've added the little sort of half moon shape negative into there where it's going to be the armpit of the pattern, so that's going to line up with the half moon shape that you can see on the inner front leg piece. I know it's a lot of pieces to remember, but once you've made a few quadruped patterns it won't seem so difficult. So what you need to do is you need to transfer all these markings onto your far outside pattern. It's a mouthful to remember, I tell you that. It might be easier if you colour code these pattern pieces as well. That could be something that you could do. You could have one maybe print in dark blue and one print in black or something like that. But I've copied all those markings and I've flipped both the gusset and that far outside body, so the pattern that we patterned that was on the side away from us. I flipped them both in the opposite direction because that's how they're going to print. And I'm going ahead and I'm just adding any changes to the marks. So you're going to be probably changing where some of the marks are in relation to the armpit of the front leg and where the start of the back leg is, things like that. So we're putting these markings on the opposite side of the gusset. We're not going to touch that side of the gusset that we've already fleshed out. This is for drawing and generating the other side. So you can see here some of those markings are minutely different. It might be a bit more different if you've got a more extreme pose. I'm not really worried that the end of this gusset isn't going to go all the way up to the top of that back rear leg. That's not really going to make too much of a difference in this pattern here. If you wanted to make it a little bit longer, then it's going to be longer also on the side that we patterned previously. So I'm just going to leave it how it is, and we can have that ending a little bit shy of that top back sort of inner rump piece. You can see here I've just done the same thing, quite simple, a very simple gusset in fact, just in the shape, and I'm labeling which side needs to go to which pattern side, and you can see that sort of the armpit area of that gusset, that sort of little half moon chunk that's taken out, that is used to pull the sort of leg in towards the body. That's quite necessary on quadruped patterns. You can just see the only difference in the gusset there is that area that's been taken out. So one of them is more forward and one of them is more back really. And then you can see all the pieces that we have for our pattern here. Just make sure that when you print everything out, your gusset is going to print out and face the right side of the pattern, so you don't want to be sewing your near side of your gusset to the far side pattern, if that makes sense. So just double check that everything's facing the right way, and make sure that when you turn this inside out, it's going to be the right way. So if you want the left leg forward or the right leg forward, you can flip the pattern accordingly, because obviously it's going to be the opposite when you end up printing it out. But I hope you guys learned a lot from this tutorial. I know it's a lot to wrap your head around, but I hope that it gave you sort of an idea of how this can be done. It's a bit tricky, but definitely go and watch the quadruped patterning tutorial that shows you how everything goes together, how everything is sewn, if you're not confident in putting together a pattern like this. But I hope that I explained it well enough. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a message on Patreon or social media or something like that, and I'll try and help as much as I can. But I hope you learned a lot, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!